Hi, everyone. Welcome to the event. We're so thrilled that you are here with us tonight. I'm seeing the participants fill up rapidly, so so glad that everyone is here. Hope the sound is working for everyone. And yeah, I'm seeing that number tick up. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Carell Centers, and I'm the events director here at Bookshop Santa Cruz, where I'm broadcasting live. And tonight we are thrilled to celebrate the release of Murder Capital of the World with Emerson Murray. Tonight we'll have a presentation about the making of the book, and then Emerson will answer some audience questions. Before we get started, a quick overview of the event platform here. We are in Zoom webinar. We can't see or hear you at home, but we are here together, and I welcome you to drop a line in the chat if you feel inclined to let us know where you're tuning in from. It's nice to create community here. And thanks in advance for being respectful. If you want everyone to see your messages, just make sure that it's set to go to everyone, or you can just sit back and let the chat go on without you, no problem. Closed captioning is automatically on. You can hide that if you would like. And this event is being recorded so that you can re-watch it if you miss anything or you want to share it with some friends. We'll send out the link tomorrow evening, or you can find the replay on our YouTube page later this evening. I'll drop a link to that in the chat. As I mentioned, we will be having an audience Q&A, and you can find the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Please go ahead and make sure you enter your questions there rather than in the chat, so we have them all in one place, so we can easily give those to Emerson later tonight. We definitely encourage you also to buy the book. I know so many folks, I was telling Emerson in the green room, we just cannot keep this book on our shelves. So I know a lot of you have it. For those of you that don't, your purchase supports local jobs and independent culture, and it just keeps our audience invested and engaged, and it supports Emerson for his years of work putting this book together. So thank you in advance for your purchase. I do have a couple of events I want to mention. If you are so inclined to join us again, local poet Angel Dominguez will be here with their epistolary collection of poems, Desgraciado, on April 5th. That's a virtual event, free. And then we have UCSC alum Reina Grande with her new historical novel, A Ballad of Love and Glory. That'll be in person at the Hay Barn at UCSC on April 7th. So check out Bookshop's website for more information, tickets, and to view our more complete upcoming schedule. We'd love to see you back at future events. But now on to the main attraction. Murder Capital of the World is Emerson Murray's second book. The first, Bruiser Brody, is a primary source biography published by Crowbar Press. Emerson has written articles, he paints, and he makes noise cassettes and CDs. He grew up in the San Lorenzo Valley and still lives in Santa Cruz County with his wife, 2 kids, and 2 dogs. And he has been collecting material for this book for over 30 years. And I'm so thrilled that we get to learn how he put it all together. Welcome to the screen. Everyone's clapping for you.
Thanks, Carell. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone for coming out. I'm gonna give a little presentation tonight. Oh, I can see all the chats. There they are. And I'm basically going to sort of go over the making of the book and what my research and all of that. So let me share my screen here. Okay, and let me move the heads over here. So yeah, thank you, Carell. Thank you, Bookshop Santa Cruz, for inviting me. This is my book right here on the cover. As you can see, the subtitle is The Santa Cruz Community Looks Back at the Frazier, Mullen, and Kemper murder sprees of the early 1970s. I published the book on July 17th, 2021, about 8 months ago, and I have 24 copies left in my garage, and I think Bookshop Santa Cruz has about the same number of copies left. So tonight, as I mentioned, rather than just talk about what's in the book, because you can go buy the book and read it, I'm going to sort of give a brief overview about my experiences in writing the book. So I know there's a good mix of Santa Cruz locals I can see in the chat and folks from out of the area, and I just want to give you a heads up when I talk about the subject. I kind of get sort of specific about peoples and locations, so I apologize in advance to folks outside the area. So this is the Oda family. They came to Santa Cruz in the early 1960s. Dr. Victor Oda, who you can see there, he was a very prominent eye surgeon in Santa Cruz. Mrs. Oda was heavily involved in local charities and clubs. And Dr. Oda, when I say a prominent eye surgeon, that's just something that I had always heard. That's a word that I had always heard used, prominent. And what did that mean? Well, what I came to understand is that Dr. Oda, he would perform eye surgeries on people for free when they couldn't pay for it. And his wife, who was actually, in my research, in the newspaper more often than he was heavily involved, like I said, with charities and clubs. The woman in the pearl necklace there, that's Dorothy Cadwallader, and she was Dr. Oda's secretary and really a friend of the family. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Dorothy Cadwallader later. Well, on October 19th, 1970, a man named John Linley Frazier murdered Dr. Oda and his wife and their two sons and Dorothy Cadwallader. The two Oda daughters, Lark and Tara, were away at different schools. Frazier murdered the family in a Manson-style attack in their home. He was caught just a few days later, and he was arrested. He was tried for the murders. He was sentenced to death, but at that time, the death penalty was overturned, and it was declared unconstitutional for a few years there in the 1970s. And so he ended up spending his life in prison, and he committed suicide in 2009. Starting in May 1972, this man, Edmund Kemper, killed 6 young co-eds. In April 1973, he killed his mother and her friend, and then he fled the county and turned himself in 3 days later. And he is still alive. He's housed in Vacaville. Around the same time that Edmund Kemper was killing co-eds, a local man named Herbert Mullen murdered 13 people. He was caught in February of 1973, and he's currently housed in Mule Creek Prison in Ione, California. So this is the newspaper. I know it's kind of small. From the day that Mullen killed his last victim, a man named Fred Paris, and he was caught that same day. And it's probably hard to read, so I'm going to read some of the titles of the headlines of these articles, and just keep in mind that this is one day in Santa Cruz. So at the top there, you see crime spree soars, another murder, and then below that, senseless slaying of Santa Cruz man. And then below that, youth held in Capitola death. And that was none of the 3 people I wrote about. That woman named Ida Stein was killed in her bathtub. And then over on the right there, a body identified as Cabrillo co-ed. It's talking about Mary Gilfoy's body being found, who was one of Mullen's victims, as well as it talks about the hitchhiking and people that were missing at that time, they would later end up being dead. Below that, 4 other rape victims reported. That was a whole nother spree that was going on. 2 booked in a kidnapping case in Riverside. And then at the very bottom there by Tom Honig, women hitchhikers, why do they do it? I mean, this is all one day. So this is really what my book is about right here. You know, the impact of these crimes on our community in Santa Cruz, and the overwhelming impact on law enforcement. And I really wanted to tell the story of who these people were in these stories, you know, who were these victims. So why did I write the book? This is where it all started for me. That's Adrian Furman, or Mouse, and I don't know if he's here tonight, on the left. That's my dad, Roger Murray, in the middle there. And on the right is a man named Jim Genera, who was a friend of my dad. My dad lived at the Boxer Apartments in Ben Lomond, and then they were later roommates at a place called the Holiday Commune, which was located near Highlands Park in Ben Lomond. This picture hung on my dad's wall for many, many years, and it was common knowledge in our family that my dad's friend Jim, on the right there, had been killed by Herbert Mullen 2 months before I was born. So that was just something that we talked about in our house. We grew up. There was never a time in my life that I didn't know the name Herbert Mullen. I can't remember where I first heard that name. Let's put it that way. As kids, my brother and I, we knew rationally that Herbert Mullen was in jail. He was in prison, but he sort of became a boogeyman to us. I equate it to like Michael Myers in the Halloween movies when I was a kid, because he killed men, women, children. He even killed a priest in Los Gatos right outside his own confessional booth. And Mullen said that he killed in order to stop earthquakes. He was hearing voices in his heads, oftentimes the voices of his parents. He was a local boy. He went to SLB High School in Felton. And I can remember my brother and I and our neighbors used to hang out on our street under the street light, and we'd tell stories about him to creep each other out, like he was a real life boogeyman. And later, when I went to SLB High School, which is the same high school that Mullen went to and graduated in 1965, we used to look at the yearbook in the library there. I would tell my friends stories, horrible stories about Herbert Mullen. My grandmother, she also collected newspaper articles and sort of morbid ones. She saved the newspaper from when the Odas and Dorothy Cadwallader were murdered. And I can remember looking at them with my foster brother Jamal and being so sad because they also printed a picture, that picture right there, of the two Oda daughters. And I was so sad for Lark and Tara Oda. And Jamal lived with us when I was in kindergarten, so I must have been 5 years old when we were looking at these pictures, which is, I imagine, to most is sort of unusual, and that would have been around 1978. So needless to say, this stuff has always sort of interested me, and like my grandmother, I started collecting articles and any bits of information that I could find. And I'm not going to say that it was an obsession or anything like that, but it was just always there in the background. Some, an anniversary would come up and I'd clip the article and throw it in a box. I remember first hearing about Edmund Kemper. This is sort of a creepy thing. At my friend Steve Schrondelhoff's house at the dinner table, his family used to discuss the crimes openly and frankly at the dinner table. And I'm guessing a lot of locals that are in the audience sort of had very similar experiences, just hearing these terrible stories and throwing darts at his mother's head and disgusting things like that. These crimes, they touched everyone in our community, and in some way or another. I found this little fanzine in Logo's bookstore. I think I was in junior high when I found it, and for me it was sort of this strange affirmation that all these stories that I had heard from my parents and from their friends, that they were all true. And I looked through it, and they tried to, I don't want to say exaggerate the crimes, but really no amount of embellishment could make the stories any worse than like the horrible reality that Santa Cruz went through. And then in the early 2000s, the BBC came out to film a couple of episodes for a series they were working on called Born to Kill. My then sister-in-law, April, was working in the sheriff's office in the public information office, and she was the liaison with the BBC. And it was kind of neat to be behind the scenes and talk to April and hear what they were working on. And I was very excited with the idea, wow, they're going to do a show about Santa Cruz. But when the episodes came out, what ended up happening was they did 3 separate episodes. One was on John Linley Frazier, one was on Herbert Mullen, one was on Kemper. And they had hardly mentioned that the Mullen and Kemper crime sprees were happening at the same time. And they certainly missed what our area was all about and the impact on the crimes. And for some reason, the impact of the crimes. And for some reason, that really bothered me tremendously. And I started formulating an idea that some sort of project had to happen. Like somebody had to get this right, because this wasn't 3 separate incidents. Like this was one thing that happened to us. So fast forward to 2019, I was still, collecting stories and snippets whenever I came across them. One of my friends and coworkers, Greg, and I sort of talked about what a great movie this would make, or some kind of TV series, with, just all the madness that was happening, and law enforcement, desperately trying to keep up with these serial killers at the same time. So lo and behold, I hear about this talk that Mickey Alufi is going to be giving. And Mickey, he was a detective, as many of you know, at the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office, and he worked on the Kemper case. So my wife and I went to go listen to the talk, and I'm sorry, that's a terrible picture of Mickey. I'm sorry, Mickey, but it's the only picture that I took that day. Mickey's talk was absolutely thrilling, and his memory is super sharp. But when I looked around, most of the audience were in their 70s and their 80s. Mickey pointed out a few people in the crowd, Austin Comstock and Sandy Leiden. Some of you may know those names. Sandy's like a local historian. But to be honest, for me, I started to panic because I felt like, oh my gosh, these stories are being forgotten as people's brain cells are aging. And so that Monday, I work at UCSC. I was sitting in my office, and I decided I'm going to write the book. This has to happen. So I immediately got to work and started making phone calls. So how did I write the book? Let me take some water. Hold on. Well, I had written a book before. I had written a biography on a professional wrestler named Bruiser Brody. Bruiser Brody was a what you would call an outlaw wrestler. He never like wrestled for the WWE or WWF back then. He traveled around the country, and he was always in these really bloody matches. And he didn't originate, the outside of the ring, hit him with the steel chair thing, but he really popularized it in the late 70s and early 80s. So I had written a biography on Bruiser Brody. It was published by Crowbar Press in 2007. It sold out its first printing. It did pretty well. And I lifted the style because I told it as quotes, much like this book, The Murder Capital of the World. And I lifted that from a book about the filmmaker Ed Wood Jr. from an author named Rudolph Gray. So yeah, like I said, it was all told in quotes. The Bruiser Brody book, I called it a primary source biography. I thought that was sort of highfalutin. Yeah, so I pulled the quotes from every source that I could get my hands on. I conducted interviews. I filled in between the quotes with my own writing, sort of like a narrator in a documentary. And I think, for some people, the style is a little confusing, like it can jump around, and the interviewee's quotes don't always like fit together where one ends and then a seamless story. But for me, I feel like the style is super organic. It's very human feeling. It uses human memory to its advantage, because one interviewee might remember a story a certain way, and then somebody else might remember it slightly differently, and the audience can sort of get all the different points of view included, like a Kurosawa movie or something. But you can include all these stories, and all these stories have value. So especially in Murder Capital of the World, where there's occasions where there's like a killer is alone with a victim. And what happened, when the killer is quoted, the reader can sort of understand. They know who is speaking. They know where that person's coming from. They know what that person has to lose or gain by telling the story the way that they're telling it. And like with Kemper, he told a story one way right after he's arrested. And then he talks to his defense attorney, to Jim Jackson, and they make an insanity plea. Well, then his story slightly changes. And then later in 2017, he's up for a parole hearing. Then his story changes again, because what does he have to gain? What does he have to lose? Who's the audience? And I think that this the format for telling a story really fits in with this particular story that happened to us. It's just a well-rounded and efficient way. So I decided to use it for Murder Capital of the World. The title of the book was sort of a no-brainer. I was surprised that it hadn't been used before. After 4 teenage boys were killed in Henry Cowell Park by Herbert Mullen, Peter Chang, our district attorney in Santa Cruz, he was bantering with a reporter from the San Francisco Examiner. And the reporter says, "Would you say that Santa Cruz is the murder capital of the world?" And Peter Chang responded, "Right now, we must be the murder capital." And of course, it took off, in the press. It was just so catchy. I read some transcripts of county, or no, they weren't transcripts, sorry. They were newspaper articles from the Board of Supervisors meetings. And Pat Litke, the supervisor from the San Lorenzo Valley, he hated the term, couldn't stand it. It came close to cussing, but was, this is idiotic and stupid and that kind of thing. But the name stuck, It stuck so much that in 1987, the film Lost Boys, which was, as I'm sure everyone knows, was shot in Santa Cruz, in part in Santa Cruz. And in the beginning of the film, when the protagonist and his big brother and his mom are driving into this new town, Santa Carlo, which was renamed, they pass this big welcome sign. And as they pass it, the camera lingers and they drive past, and it reveals on the back of the sign in big graffiti, it says "Murder, Capital of the World." And I always think it's sort of a joke. It's sort of funny because Santa Carla in the movie, they just have a handful of teenage vampires. And Santa Cruz in real life, we had like this Manson style mass murderer who left this Zodiac style note, and he dreamed of this like big uprising against people that damaged the natural order. And then we had on the heels of those crimes, we had two serial killers, one who shoots men, women, and children and priests, and the other who's this like 6'9" necrophile cannibal who preys on girls and young women. And I always think like, oh my gosh, I think we would have had a lot easier time if we would have just had a group of teenage vampires. So I thought they had it easy in the Lost Boys. So I have the style. I had the name. I just needed to start to talk to people and get resources, start looking at resources. So I had sort of a two-pronged attack. So first, I immediately started looking online for all the first-person resources that I could find, like parole hearing transcripts, YouTube interviews, like Kemper there, they interviewed him a few times and you can't get him to stop talking. So old newspapers are online now, so I just scoured through those and looking for quotes from the time period. I found great quotes, during the crimes and also from the trials. I found quotes from law enforcement and from some of the victims' families and other people that testified. And there were also, of course, great articles on hitchhiking at the time, which is big. People forget that, and sort of the dangers. They also talk about the hippie invasion. And at the same time, the other prong, I started making phone calls and writing letters. And for me, I always think of it as sort of this spider web. I started with Bob Ludlow, who's a local attorney and also a family friend. My mom knew him when they were very young. And of course, Bob knows everybody. So he connects me with, 20 different people. And I'm taught, hey, you got to go talk to Sam Robustelli and Chris Caudle, and boom, and then they lead me to other people. So, and I felt like if a person was connected to the crimes, what do I want to say, in a professional manner, like an attorney or law enforcement or something, then I felt real comfortable that I could just call them on the phone and ask for an interview. But if a person was like a family member or a friend of a victim, I generally wrote letters first, just to sort of, I felt like a phone call might feel like an ambush. And then it also allowed them the chance, like, you can communicate me if you want to talk. So that was sort of that two-pronged attack. And both groups were really a mixed bag. Some attorneys and retired law enforcement were interested in talking about the crime sprees. They had been, shocked and some of them very deeply impacted by their experiences. Mickey Alufi, I met him a couple of times. Like I said, he was a detective that worked on the case, and he's a huge part of the story. Terry Medina was also a detective, and he was super gracious with his time. And he was just super candid and wonderful. He wasn't shy or too proud to express, the nightmares of the things he saw and how they impacted him. And some of those talks were very emotional. Jim Connor, Jim Jackson, Dave Alcorn, those are a few others you can see in the book. They just were so gracious with their time. Others like Harold Cartwright, who was an investigator for the public defender's office, and he's pictured here. He's in this picture, he's leaving the courthouse with Dolores Frazier, who was John Linley Frazier's wife. Harold told me that he was sick of it. He didn't want to talk about it anymore. And he told me he didn't have a day off for 13 months during that time period. He wished he had never been involved in it at all. And I told Harold, I said, I have a lot on the crimes. You don't even need to talk about the crimes, but what I don't have information on, and what other people haven't written about, is who was Peter Chang, our district attorney, and who was Jim Jackson, your boss, the public defender, and all those local people that were involved that are supremely interesting to me, but no Hollywood producer is ever going to ask you about. And I think our conversation, mine and Harold's, ended up being over 3 hours long. And he was fantastic. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. Let me take some water. The families of the victims were sort of the same mixed bag. Some of them never responded back to me, to my letters, and some, frankly, were outraged that I even contacted them. Some families were just downright excited to talk to me. This is Mary Gilfoy right here. Her family called her Honey. She was born in a taxi cab in New York. She had open heart surgery when she was 6 or 7 years old, one of the youngest people. They wrote about her in the newspaper. She was smart as a whip, and she graduated high school a year early. She went to college in New York, and then she moved to California for some reason, and I couldn't find anyone that's alive that knows exactly how that connection was made, how she moved from New York to California. When she got to California, she went to Cabrillo College, which is a junior college here. And on Monday, October 23rd, 1972, Herbert Mullen was driving by Cabrillo College, and in front of it, he saw this big white Cadillac parked on the street in front of Cabrillo College. And the car he recognized that it belonged to a man named Ray Liebenberg, and some of you locals may know the Liebenberg family. It's old, I think they're a logging family, but they're an old like Boulder Creek family. Ray Liebenberg, he was an interesting character. He was a tree trimmer and he was a chiropractor. And he had run for supervisor. And I can actually remember him driving through the San Lorenzo Valley. He had that big white Cadillac. He'd always have his window down, and he had this long beard that would flap out the windows. And every time he'd drive by, my mom and my dad would see him and they'd go, "There's Ray Liebenberg. There's Ray Liebenberg." So my brother and I started saying that if we'd see him first, "There's Ray Liebenberg." Anyway, Mullen's driving by, he sees this car and he hears Ray Liebenberg's voice in his head. And Ray Liebenberg tells him, "Oh, Herb, you're going to need to kill somebody for me." So the next day, May 24th, Mullen is driving by the same area, the same spot in front of Cabrillo. Liebenberg's car is not there. Instead, there's a woman with her thumb out, and it's Mary Gilfoy as she's hitchhiking. And she was Herbert Mullen's second victim. Mary Gilfoy had a brother who has since passed away, but her brother's wife was still alive, and she's one of the few people who actually remember Mary. When we got in touch, she said to me, and I'm going to read this quote because it's important to me that the language is correct. She said, "I'm so happy you're doing this project. No one remembers Mary. We didn't think anyone cared. We see documentaries and books about her killer, but no one has ever called us or reached out to us to hear about Mary." This picture was taken a couple of months before she was killed. David Cadwallader was a brother-in-law, of Dorothy Cadwallader, and I was told not to call him between 4 in the afternoon and 5 because he liked to take naps. We had a great conversation about Dorothy Cadwallader and her family. Her maiden name was Kinney, and they had moved. They had been in the broom making business for generations, and they moved to Santa Cruz and they made brooms until they closed shop in 1984, Kinney Brooms. David told me that he would look for pictures of Dorothy for me because there's very few pictures of her. This is one of the only pictures. And I joked, "Hey, David, I know I'll call you back in a few days, but I know that you like to take naps, so I won't call you between 4 and 5. And he laughed and he said, "Hey, you can call me anytime. I'll wake up to talk to you." But he died the next day. So I literally talked to him and then he died. So that was Dorothy Cadwallader. This is John Paris. He's the son of Fred Paris, who was Mullen's last victim. He still lives in the house that his father did. Believe it or not, the Paris family has been and it's pronounced Paris. It's spelled Perez, P-E-R-E-Z, but it's pronounced Paris, like the city. His family has been in Santa Cruz since 1796. He told me that the first Stagnero came in 1870. That's another big local name if you're from out of the area. And John's grandfather hid this Stagnero gentleman on his boat for a couple of weeks because it was actually illegal for people to get off of a boat without the right papers in California at that time because of the gold rush, which absolutely boggled my mind at the timing of that, you know. He still lives on the property, like I said, and he brought me out to the spot where his father was murdered. Fred Paris was filling in a pothole right there next to that telephone pole in the picture, and Mullen parked down the street sort of behind where the camera would be if you were the camera in this picture. And Mullen had a car where a station wagon where the back rolled down, and he had a bunch of firewood back there. So he rolls down the back window, he leans across the firewood and fires a shot out of the back of the car. And John is telling me right here in this picture that Mullen only fired one shot. And John's quote is, "It was just a fabulous shot. It was one shot and it went right into his father's heart." A woman named Joan Stagnero, of the Stagnero family, obviously, lived right across the street. She saw Mullen heard the shot, saw Mullen pull away in his car. Her two boys and another neighbor ran out to Fred Paris as he passed away. She called the police. Mullen, got out to Mission Street, turned right, went down Mission Street. He did make a stop at some point, and then turned left on River Road to head towards Felton. And that's where law enforcement picked him up and he was arrested and his crime spree was over. The families of the killers were also sort of victims in a strange way. It was negative attention they didn't ask for or really deserve. Herbert Mullen's sister is still alive. She was older and it had moved out by the time the Mullen family moved to Felton. I wrote her a few times, but I didn't get a response. Same Mullen's girlfriend is still around, but not interested in talking. I wrote to Kemper's sister. I didn't hear back, but then I had received some audio tapes with interviews with her and her voice. And I just, I was transcribing the tapes night after night after night because I'm really slow at it, and listening to her voice. And she was actually very funny, very intelligent, kind of this wry sense of humor. And it was this weird thing, that we get in even with celebrities where you think you know them. And I felt like, oh, I think I know this person. So I decided to call her up and explain, and just say, hey, I'm not sure if you got my letter or not. I don't want to talk about your brother at all. I have all I need on him. I really just wanted to talk to you about your mother, Clarnell, who Kemper had killed, because at that time, all we knew about Clarnell was from Kemper. And of course, that's fully loaded, that, he hates her and loves her and all of that, a victim of her, and he victimized her. I just want a three-dimensional image of who your mom was. And she was very gracious and listened to me. But when I paused, she said, if I would have wanted to talk to you, I would have contacted you, and then hung up on me and immediately sent a text to me and said, contact me and I will refer to my lawyer. And I, kind of an asshole, I guess, but I wanted to respond like, oh, so I guess coffee's out of the question, because I thought like, haha, that would be funny to the person that I had heard in the tape. So that was my bad, and that was one thing that I sort of regret, was even reaching out. The local perspective in the history on the impact on our community, that was easy. Many of you in the audience, locals, you can bring up the Odas or one of the killers or something, any of the victims at a grocery store, and somebody's going to have a story. They're everywhere around here. They're just part of our local history and scarred us very deeply. The times that they were committed in were extreme, very tumultuous times with the youth movement, Vietnam War. UCSC opened up in 1965. There were changes in welfare regulations that brought outsiders. The defunding of mental hospitals in California at that time. Drugs were more readily available, and those damn hippies moved into Ben Lomond. This is a picture of my dad and some of the people from the Holiday Commune in Ben Lomond. I'm not sure that's Jim or Jerry Warner on the left-hand side there. And next to him up on the bus is Jim Basie, Jim Alexander. That's Holly in the middle in the front. And I think that's her brother next to her. And then all the way on the right, that's with his hand behind his back, is my dad, Roger. And they're leaning against his bus. In front of Roger, that's Jim Gennaro. So the county board of supervisors, they actually hired a company to conduct a study on what they called the undesirable transient element. The study cost $15,000, and what it came back with was, yes, there's a lot of tension in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is like, unlike any other county in the state, it has this huge population of elderly and a huge youth population with sort of a small middle-aged population. And I always thought that was sort of interesting, but it contributed to a lot of tensions. The report also stated that the undesirable element was really mostly surfers and young people who didn't really commit crimes, except they were smoking marijuana and taking some LSD. And they noted that the hard drugs were really being sold and used by people who looked much more like businessmen than hippies. And they added that really a lot of these folks that you call hippies are your kids. They're local kids. They are of you. So the report didn't go over so well. The Board of Supervisors was pissed. And in fact, it actually kind of went the other way, and it created this sort of mini industry of Ute proud shirts and bags and posters. That's a bag that I have from my dad, and I have a T-shirt and a flag somewhere. And that whole Ute movement sort of played this big part in getting Pat Lickey, who the press called the hippie mayor, elected to the Board of Supervisors shortly after. So Santa Cruz was already a pretty hot place when the Zodiac killer started murdering people in the Bay Area, and when Charles Manson's followers committed their murders in Southern California. So this notion after the Manson crimes of hippies turned very dark for some people. Peace and love my ass. They're killing people. So calling Santa Cruz a powder keg is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was hot here when the Oda and Cadwallader murders occurred. So I talked to many of these people. I pulled quotes from newspapers. My parents, they had worked on Pat Lickey's campaign. Even my grandmother, Lou Hartney, who was a serious Republican all her life, she worked on that campaign. And I started assembling all the quotes into these relevant chapters and started stringing them together in a program that's kind of small called Indesign. So the layout of the book is really an important part of the book for me. I don't view the book as like a manuscript, made in Word and then put into a book. I view it, it was created as a book. I wrote the book in InDesign with the pictures. It's all for me, like one piece of art. The book is what it is. There is no manuscript. It doesn't exist. So I did little things. I wanted the crimes to hit the reader in a more personal way. I named each chapter after the victim and the day they were killed. I added the name of the week because I felt like that would add a little context, sort of make it more real. I did other things like you can see here, like the right side of the columns, I left them unjustified and jagged just to give sort of a slightly chaotic look. And I don't really know if that works, but I wanted the book to be a fast read, and I wanted to sort of convey in I don't know if subliminal is the right word, but like a subliminal way, the chaos and the confusion that law enforcement was going through and that the community was going through. And I just a little bit of chaos. I didn't want the book hard to read, but just add a little feeling there. And then, like I said at the beginning of this talk, the book is written kind of for locals. When I started it, that was what was in mind. It's a local history. And I talk about, I say things like Highway 17 and Johnny's Market, Mission Street, and I don't really slow down on those things. This is the table of contents. I hate table of contents. I never even look at them in books. So I decided just to do something kind of weird, and it's almost unreadable, but I thought, it'd be cool if it looked sort of like a board in like some detective office or something, and photos. So yeah, photos. So this is Sheriff Doug James on the left. I'll go over who these folks are. Next to him is Assistant Sheriff Lee Davis. And then on his left is Marge Von B, who was a reporter from the Register Pajaronian and a big part of all this. In the middle, that's Peter Chang, our district attorney at the time. And then on the right, that's John Lee Frazier saying hi to everyone, I guess. For photos, I got permission from the Valley Press newspaper and from the Santa Cruz Sentinel to print pictures from their newspaper. I found the Vestal family. The late Sam Vestal, he was a photographer for the Register Pajaronian, and his family was awesome and kind enough to share pictures with me. And they also have a great Sam Vestal photography page on Facebook you should check out. There's a retired Santa Cruz Sentinel photographer named Pete Amos, And I wrote him a letter. He called me and said, "Hey, I have some negatives for you." And I said, "Holy moly, negatives? I'll be right there, Pete." And so my family, they were troopers. We jumped in the car, my wife, my two kids, and we pull out onto the highway, on Highway 17. And my wife says, "Which way are we going? Are we going north or south?" And I said, "Oh, damn, I don't even know where we're headed." Pete lives in a town called Castle, California, Cassel. And I didn't, I was so excited to get the negatives, I didn't even look it up. So I Google map it, and it was 6 hours away. So my family was total troopers. We drove the 6 hours. I was only at Pete's house for like 20 minutes. And then we drove the 6 hours back. But, and these negatives are amazing. You know, you think, you know, a photographer takes a roll of film, 24 pictures, and one of them makes it into the newspaper. Well, these are the other 23 right here. And I asked him offhanded, I said, "Hey, if the negatives are dirty, Pete, how do I clean them? I don't remember how to clean negatives." And he said, "Clean them? You're not going to have to clean them. These negatives haven't been out of the envelope since 1973. And my jaw just like dropped on the floor. I was like, nobody has seen these things. So it's just so gracious of everybody. So I decided to, this is my garage, decided to self-publish the book. I had 1,000 copies printed. Just FYI, that's 3,002 pounds of books in my garage. Unfortunately, my dad passed away in May of last year, and his memorial was held on July 17th. So I made that as like the official release date, and released the book on that day. And it's been an absolute whirlwind so far. I was on KGO Radio, K-Squid, KSCO, a few podcasts, interviewed for a couple of TV shows. I learned how to make a Kindle of the book. Wallace Payne wrote this fantastic piece for Lookout Santa Cruz. He called the book a classic. And Jeffrey Dunn, some of you may have seen, wrote another fantastic article for the Good Times, and they threw my face on the cover, which made me sick to my stomach, but my kids made fun of me. But that's cool, and they used that cool picture. And the first printing is nearly sold out. Like I said earlier, Bookshop Santa Cruz has like 24 copies left and I have like 24 left in my garage. The book was optioned by some Hollywood folks, and they're working on a documentary miniseries. They're shopping it around to networks. But kind of what I wanted to say in the end here was, because it's a book of quotes and I talk to so many people, it just feels like the whole thing has really been like a team effort. And I wanted to say the community has just been really extremely kind and supportive. I started a Facebook group for the book, and that community is unbelievable and totally supportive and just so damn nice. So I just want to end with like a big fat thank you to everyone who helped out. Thank you all for coming and listening to me blab. I always say, like, it's not a fun book, it's not a happy subject, but I feel like it's an important part of our shared history, and it should never be forgotten. So that's it. Thank you. I'm stopping sharing.
Thank you so much, Emerson. Wow,
Sure.
that's incredible.
It's very weird to have it's on my headphones is silent. So
yeah, you're like all alone presenting us with this incredible slideshow, but I promise you that I think I speak for everyone that I was just absolutely riveted and very moved as well. So thank you so much. Reminder for folks that we do have a few minutes left here for questions. So if you have some questions, we've got a few in the Q&A, and I will start with those. But if you have some, we can, you just pop them in that Q&A tab. And I'll just start from the top, and we can make our way through them. Patricia is wondering what the self-publishing process was like for you.
For me, it was very freeing. Like I said, I had an idea of what I wanted, exactly what I wanted, and I wasn't willing to compromise. And I knew no publisher was going to make a 552-page book on like a local history book.
And it's on I'll add, it's on heavy not glossy, but nice paper.
Yeah,
all photo quality paper as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hefty book. And what do I want to say? I learned InDesign through the first book, so I designed it all. there's so many resources out there for self-publishing now that I think it's a lot easier than it used to be. The one thing that you don't get is there's 1,000 bad ideas for how to hype your book and how to market your book. And you just kind of have to figure that out for yourself, because nobody can really help you. Like, you have to just sort of come up with ideas on your own. That
How to
was,
market and promote and everything.
yeah, especially how to promote. And I'm terrible at that, but I shouldn't say that. But
yeah, I don't think that's true. I mean, maybe the book just promotes itself.
Yeah, there you go. I like that better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it allows me to be terrible. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the most challenging part. But when I talked to people that had been published by traditional publishing houses, the publishing houses went to them and they said, the best way to the only person that can really market your book is the author. And so it was like, well, if you're going to throw it back on me, what the hell do I need you for? So my perspective, I'm sure other people have a different perspective, and Carell, who works at a bookstore, can't say things like that, but that was my feeling. So
I guess my follow-up for that would be like, what about the editor? Like, did you have someone editing it with you or looking?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. And I thanked him. I made a joke and I thanked him in there, and then I put a misspelling in there just to fix him up. But
very appreciative.
Yeah. So yeah, I had some help. I had a friend that I don't want to say he's a professional editor, but that's what he does all day. Let's put it that way. And so that was awesome. He helped me out. I had a couple other folks help me out. I had another friend help me out, and then there is a woman that runs an Ed Kemper website, and she is just fact-based and serious about it. So I had her help me with some of the fact-checking part of it. So I had a couple of different editors looking at sort of different things.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you for speaking of that. We have a question from Sean here. In the book, you mentioned your father a few times. Did your father ever cross paths with these killers or anyone that was murdered? Well, I know from the photo that you showed.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, my dad was very close with Jim Gennaro. They were roommates. And in the book, yeah, my dad talks about Jim, and his experiences with Jim. He did not, Herbert Mullen went to the holiday commune, but it was sort of near the end, and my dad had already moved out. He had already moved in with my mom, so he certainly didn't meet Herbert Mullen. I talk about it in the book. He found Fraser's campsite. I don't think he ever met Fraser, and there's no, he wouldn't have met Kemper. There's no way he would have met Kemper, but yeah, other than Jim, he probably met Joan Gennaro, Jim's wife, and I'm not, I think that's probably it. Yeah.
Yeah. Victoria's wondering which of these men are still living and how are they being made responsible for what they've done?
Yeah.
She says, I saw a documentary about Kemper and he seemed to be enjoying his life, and there was a feeling of almost admiration for this monster. She also thinks you're reading the book.
Yeah, yeah. You get that a lot, especially with Kemper. There's a certain fascination that people have, and some people sort of take that, I feel like, maybe a little too far, maybe to extremes.
Yeah.
Because of the fascination, it's interesting the way it can swerve into like a positive thing in some ways. So yeah, Fraser committed suicide. Both Kemper and Mullen are still alive. Kemper is in Mule Creek in Mule Creek prison, and that's actually where Fraser was when he died. He was in Mule Creek. He had just been transferred there. I actually went and visited Herbert Mullen not that long ago. That was mind-blowing, but like it felt like, oh my God, take this horror off my back.
Being with him, you felt that like in his presence, or
just because I was scared of him, it had been spent my life scared of him, and to see this
right.
Weak old man in front of you, toothless old man, was just like, and just to see him sort of like, I think it was Victoria sort of said, like, he's where he needs to be. He needs to be in prison, and he needs to be the rest of his life. And it just is like a sort of peace of mind, like he is there.
Yeah.
I don't really have an opinion on why the death penalty was declared unconstitutional for those few years, but they probably would have gotten the death penalty. But they didn't, and they are up for parole every few years.
Mm.
Yeah, Mullen just had his parole hearing, and that did not go well for him at all. That they actually said that the counselors in prison found him more, I don't want to say insane, but insane. I don't know what else to say. More mentally unfit. His mental health is worse now than it has been in the past because he's under these delusions been under these delusions for so long. Kemper, I think his next parole hearing is in 2024. So they do come up. I mean, it's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
And Kemper, yeah, I don't know. I guess he found his way in prison or whatever. I mean, you got to remember he killed his grandparents when he was 15. So he was locked in a Tascadero for many years. I mean, his life is in prison. So has been in
Yeah.
prison or institutions. So.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of a related question from Amber
Mhm.
here on that. She mentions you've met Herbert Mullen. Was he prone to answering your questions? Was he cooperative?
He would not and will not talk about any of the crimes.
Hmm.
He talks about Jim Genera, even like, oh, my old friend Jim Genera, like, sir, kind sir, you murdered the man, like, but that it just is not in there. So he does not talk about the crimes. He talks about nature. He talks about the stars. He talks about things like that.
Hmm.
The strangest thing for me was that when I went, it was around Christmas time. So they were taking pictures in front of this. It almost looked like it's like a little cottage. Who's that painter that did all the little cottages? I can't remember his name.
Thomas Kincaid, painter of life.
Kincaid. Yeah, it looked like a Thomas Kincaid, like sticky kind of picture. They were taking pictures in front of him, and Mullen I'd be talking to him, and then suddenly he would be gone. You could tell he was gone, and he's talking to himself and stuff. And he's looking at this thing. It was behind me that they were taking pictures in front of. It was behind me. He's looking at it, and he starts mumbling. And I said, "What are you mumbling about? Like, what's going on? What are you thinking about right now?" And he said, "It must be real cozy in that cabin there." And I said, "Oh yeah, yeah." He said, "But where we are, it's probably really cold." And I thought, well, shit, who does that? Who has ever looks at a painting and imagines himself where the painter is, and imagines himself? And it was sort of like, yeah, you are an outsider. You're truly an outsider in this world if you're imagining yourself out there in the cold. Yeah, I think nobody, I think, looks at a Thomas Kincaid painting. Well, they may want to gag and throw up, but nobody looks at it and imagines like, wow, I'm out here in the cold. You always imagine yourself, oh, that's so cozy and cute. That's what he made his career on.
Yeah.
But this man, this killer, is imagining himself, I'm the one out in the snow looking in. I mean, that was like, whoa, okay.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. And was that always in person, like, or was that in a
Yeah, that was
screen?
in person. I went to Mule Creek, and that was a wild experience in and of itself.
Wow.
Yeah.
And one more question here, kind of related. This is a part of Amber's question. You've asked Edmund Kemper for an interview, but have not received an answer. And she's wondering, will you keep trying for an interview with Kemper?
No, I don't need it. He talks so much. I have so many, I mean, YouTube aside, I have so many other interviews with him that I don't see a whole lot of value in interviewing him at this point. I just don't. And yeah, I think his perspective changes so much that the current perspective just doesn't provide a lot of value. I always felt like right after he was arrested and they interviewed him in Pueblo, Colorado, that is probably as close to the truth as you're ever going to get about what happened those days of those crimes.
Gotcha. Do you feel like the project is done? Like,
no, I don't, because the same thing happened when the Bruiser Brody book came out. As soon as the book came out, a lot of people came out and said, "Oh my gosh, I got a story for you." And I met one of Alice Liu's ex-boyfriends, and he sent me a ton of her letters, and they're cute and fun letters. They're interesting letters. In the context of things, they're heartbreaking. there's just been things like that where there's stories. And then also, you know, these producers are working on this TV show if they can sell it. And so it goes on, and other people have asked me for interviews and stuff like that for other TV shows and things. It goes on. I'm sure it'll fade out, you know, and that's okay with me because it's pretty damn dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of that, Anonymous says this must have been I was wondering about this too. This must have been a very emotional journey to investigate and tell these stories. How did you take care of yourself in the process?
That's a great question, and I don't know that I have a good answer for it.
It
was, yeah, it was dark. It was a very dark time. You know, I had my wife, my kids, and that was good. I could always step away. I worked on it at night after they were in bed. But a lot of it was the victims and the victims' families, and just trying to do right for those people, because like I said before, I said somewhere, I don't remember, but a lot of them had very short lives. And so some of it takes a lot of digging to sort of find out who these people were. And I felt like their stories just needed to be told, because you just see so many projects where it's like serial killers as rock star, and that just pisses me off. And that's fine if people like that, that's good on you, but it's just not what I'm interested in and what I wanted to do. So for me, it was like, let's get to the heart of this. And then also, I'll be honest, is whenever I would find something new, that was like extremely motivating, you know, like, oh my God, we got new information here. We got a new picture. We got something, you know, especially like that connection to Mary Gilfoy. It was right during the CZU fires, and we were evacuated and we're living in my mother and father-in-law's house. And I get this call from New York, and like, oh my gosh, it was just through all the stress, hearing them and their excitement. And, you know, they sent me these original pictures of Mary Gilfoy that nobody had ever seen. All we'd ever seen are these two horrible pictures from the newspaper that it doesn't even look like her. And now it's like, we know who she is. She had a life. She was an important person, you know. I mean,
thank you.
Sorry.
No, please don't apologize. For anyone that's lost someone, I think it means so much to have them remembered, and thank you for that. Amy is wondering, were any of Mullen's victims in either Saratoga or Montalvo?
I don't know if any of them were from there, but none of them were killed there that I know of. Somebody in the comments could correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. It's another reason to write a book. When you have a terrible memory like I do, you get it all down, and then you can go refer to it.
Page 39.
Yeah. That's my biggest fear in these kind of things in interviews, is because my memory is so bad.
Yeah. Okay, we've got time for just a couple more here. Okay. Anonymous is wondering about the painting behind you. Is it related to the project?
No, that's my daughter. That's just one of my paintings
on the side. Of your daughter?
Yeah. So, yeah, reaching out like a star field. Yeah.
Did you make the painting?
Yeah, I painted it. Yeah.
That's cool. You've got a lot of artistic props on the stove. I'm interested in the noise cassettes too.
Oh yeah. go to emersonmurray.com. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I'll tell you that right now.
Okay, great. And there's another one more question here from Victoria. It's a little bit of a detailed question. Do you discuss the murder of Vicky Bazor, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing the names, and Mary Gorman in your book, also the murder of Joyce Coulter?
Man, I know the second two names. No, I don't discuss those in the book. There's a chapter on other crimes other crimes really that happened during that. So if they were like even after April of 1973, then they probably wouldn't. No, that's not true, because I discuss Carpenter a little bit. Yeah, I don't think they're in the book. Yeah, and you can email me if you have details or something like that.
Jeffrey Dunn has written in the comments, or in the chat rather, they were killed by Blue Summerhalder.
Oh, Summerhalder. Okay, yeah, then they are in the book. Yeah, okay. He knows.
Yeah,
they're not in any kind of detail. They may be mentioned in the book, but yeah, if they were Summerhalder victims, then yeah, I just mentioned Summerhalder very briefly.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, I'm wondering what you might be working on next. Are you still kind of like birthing this and kind of finishing up.
Yeah, I'm still working on this. I've thought about other books. You know, I've said before, this was a local history book that sort of rode the wave of true crime, and so people have asked me to do another true crime book, but I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot
It's
of
pretty,
time to spend in that.
yeah, dark
darkness.
for
Yeah.
me. So I have a couple of other ideas, but honestly, I started painting again, and I am still working, like I said, on like the TV show and
Yeah.
possibly a second edition if I have enough material to make it worthwhile. So
Got it. Cool. Wow. Well, I'm just so thrilled. We've been waiting for this event for, it's been so lovely to work with you. And I know that it's just, yeah, this book is so important. And when I see how many people, just gravitate towards it naturally in the store, they just go toward it like a magnet and pick it up, whether they're tourists, whether they're locals. There's just a real draw to the book. And I think you've done something really important here. And I really appreciate it so much.
well, thank you so much. And thanks
Yeah.
to Bookshop Santa Cruz, and everyone who bought the book. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This event has been recorded. We will send that recording out tomorrow. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. It'll go out about 24 hours. There's a lot of sharing that happened in the chat too, that I just want to express appreciation for. Thank you everyone that participated in that. I'm going to say it right now so I can send it to you, Emerson.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't get to read. It's hard for me to see when I get nervous. I don't know why. It's weird.
Well, it totally makes sense to me. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining, and thank you, Emerson. And I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.